With just the pilot episode, It, Welcome to Derry has transported us back into the world of Andy Muschietti's films, but given that this is a prequel show, we're made to travel long before the events of It 2017 and It Chapter 2. This prequel series certainly promises to dig deeper into the dark history of Derry in order to shed light on the cyclical horrors that have haunted the town for decades. Andy Muschietti has his own timeline in the Pennywise franchise. After the 1990 miniseries, Stephen King's It received a much-anticipated big-screen adaptation directed by Andy Muschietti in 2017 and 2019. The success of these films led to the creation of Welcome to Derry, a prequel series that expands on the terrifying legacy of the town. Produced by Andy and Barbara Muschietti, the show will explore Derry's cursed past through a whole new lens. While his films set the action in the late 80s and mid-2010s, focusing on the Losers Club both as adults and kids, the prequel takes us even further back to the 1960s, which marks another dark chapter in Derry's twisted history. By narrowing into the town's past, Welcome to Derry seems to be hell-bent on unearthing the roots of the terror that would later define the town, all while bringing to life the very horrors that made the story so forgettable. I mean, killing off half the crew in the first episode is no joke. Muschietti has fully ignored Stephen King's slow-burning temperament and simply declared bloody war. But to be honest, we're not complaining at all. Because even with his own added twists and turns, we might get to witness some of the most unsettling tragic incidents and mass murders in the prequel. Having said that, let's take a gander at every historical event or mass murder we can expect to see in It, Welcome to Derry. Before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Beep, beep, Richie.
Pennywise's timeline check for the prequel show. For those who don't know, Stephen King's novel It has 5 interludes which connect to the other chapters of the book and gives you detailed insights on Pennywise's hauntings across Derry during each of his 27-year cycles. Welcome to Derry is definitely set in the grand universe of King and is also based on his original novel, but it mostly expands the vision of Andy Muschietti after the success of the It duology. The filmmaker himself has mentioned that the prequel show will be based on the interludes of the book, which are basically chapters that reflect Mike Hanlon's research, or at least the fragments of it. After the Loser Club temporarily defeated Pennywise for the first time, Mike spent the next 27 years trying to figure out what the evil in Derry is and how it has haunted the town for centuries. For anyone who hasn't read King's novel, Mike Hanlon is the one member of the Losers Club who stays behind in Derry after the kids defeat the monster the first time around. The novel's 5 interludes are essentially diary entries written by Mike in which he compiles a history of Derry, chronicling the town's darker chapters that coincide with the cycles in which Pennywise awakens to fear. These interludes mostly talk about the catastrophic events from the past, the fire in the Black Spot, the massacre of the Bradley Gang, and the explosion of the Kitchener Iron Works. Basically, these chapters will go on to form the foundation for the new prequel show. Even though Andy Muschietti's It movies were based on King's novel, there was one key difference that will have a knock-on effect for the series. While the childhood portion of the books was set in the late 50s, the childhood section of the movies takes place in the 80s. This means that all the cycles in Muschietti's It universe are essentially pushed back by 1. We know from the pilot episode that Welcome to Derry is taking place in 1962, which is exactly 27 years before It Chapter 1, where we see the young losers in their full glory in the summer of 1989. So, this is Pennywise's previous cycle before he awoke to haunt Bill and his friends. Moreover, in the novel, Pennywise's killing cycles are bookended by catastrophic events, as the 1930s cycle starts with the massacre of the Bradley Gang and ends with the fire at the Black Spot, while the cycle before that ends with the Iron Works exploding. So, if you go by the parallels of the timeline differences between King's novel, where the Losers Club first met Pennywise in 1957, it means that the prequel show will follow the previous cycle of the 1930s, as detailed in the novel's interludes. And we know from Muschietti's interview that he's been planning 3 seasons of this new show, each of which will jump back in time, but for now, let's just focus on which large-scale event Welcome to Derry can adapt from King's works in order to turn them into key moments in the town's history, the killer clown's preying cycle.
Just suck the wound. I need to focus right now.
You need to focus?
Yeah, can you go get me something?
The Bradley Gang Massacre. So, in King's OG novel, the Bradley Gang, led by Al and George Bradley, notorious criminals regularly involved in bank robberies and other illicit activities in Derry during the late 1920s. They would not only rob stores, they would also murder their owners, and finally, a reign of terror culminates in a violent confrontation with the townspeople in the wake of Pennywise slowly coming out of his 27-year hibernation cycle. Apparently, in the year 1929, the Bradley Gang's criminal activities reached a tipping point. According to accounts in Mike's entries in the interlude segments of It, he mentions more than a few of these rituals and sacrifices, some of which he had learned about from those in Derry who were still alive and were willing to talk with him. But the ones we specifically hear about in great detail are ones that happen in the cycle between 1929 to 31 and 1904 to 1906 in the novel. Moreover, the shootout incident involving this group of bandits was connected to the well house via the sewer, so it has Pennywise written all over it. Anyways, as Pennywise wakes up to haunt Derry after 27 years, the good people of the town were viscerally wrapped under his influence, or at least that's what Mike makes out from what Norbert Keene, the man who ran the Center Street drugstore, told him. One day, Al and his brother George, along with 6 other men in their gang, went to an ammunition store and placed a massive order which they would come to pick up the next day. Now, the store owner immediately recognized them, and so he alerted the sheriff of Derry that the Bradley gang will probably hit one of the banks in town very soon. Now, after this information spread across town in hushed tones, over 50 men armed themselves to the brim and waited inside the stores near the intersection by the bank. The Bradley gang's cars arrived. In broad daylight, right as the gang members stepped out in the middle of the street, all the armed men who were waiting, including the sheriff, immediately began firing at them and didn't stop until every last person in the Bradley gang was dead. Both George and Al, along with their wives, were supposedly shot in the head at point blank from an armed shotgun. Plus, 2 relatively innocent women also lost their lives in this exchange, but the locals casually brushed that off by calling them a couple of whores. According to what Norbert Keene told Mike, the former also mentioned how many townspeople had seen a clown shooting the same gun they had been using, but each of them saw him somewhere else in town during the shooting. One person recalled seeing him floating outside a window, which means that Pennywise was collectively influencing all 50 people involved in this massacre at the same time. Not only that, after the massacre, the bodies of the gang members, along with the few townspeople that were caught in the crossfire, were left in the streets and waterways where they were exposed to the elements. The sight of the bodies floating in the drains and rivers became a symbol of the unchecked violence and the town's slow descent into decay. Moreover, this mass murder was swiftly covered up, with townspeople choosing to remain silent about the event and simply turning an eye to the evidence right in front of them. However, the incident had lasting effects on Derry and is considered one of the high points of horror in the town's history, thus contributing to the unnerving cycle of violence and fear that feeds the entity residing in the sewers. The massacre's brutality and the subsequent silence surrounding it exemplifies the dark undercurrents that permeate Derry's society. According to Mike's theories in the books, Pennywise's violent cycle of terror began with a monstrous sacrifice and ended with the same, but given that Andy Muschietti based the prequel show on this Pennywise cycle itself, the clown's violent cycle in Welcome to Derry clearly began with the birth of the flying mutant demon babe, followed by the disappearance of Maddie Clements, and finally, the mass murder of 3 kids in the movie. While we haven't seen any hints of gang violence in town yet, we're sure the filmmaker will factor this event into the Pennywise cycle somewhere, because after all, this might have been one of the most apathetic crimes in Derry's history.
What's the Black Spot?
The Black Spot was a nightclub that was burned down years ago by that racist cult.
What?
The Black Spot Club Fire. The massacre that ended the feeding cycle before Pennywise first met the Losers Club is one of the most horrific accounts of the monster's violence in Derry. This incident will definitely make it to screens, as the prequel show has already cemented hints for the fire to play out in the upcoming episodes. While this incident happened in 1930 in the books, according to Ben Hanscom's research into Derry's dark history in It Chapter 1, the Black Spot Fire was just one in a long line of tragic events in the cursed town's unsettling past. Andy Muschietti tweaked Mike's backstory and the fate of his parents in the films, so It, Welcome to Derry, explores the same event from a slightly different perspective. Set in 1962, the showrunners have opted for Mike's grandfather, Leroy Hanlon, to don the Air Force uniform rather than his father, as seen in the novel. Exploring the events leading up to this pivotal moment, Leroy will also be working alongside none other than The Shining's Dick Halloran, who will apparently be another co-founder of the establishment. Welcome to Derry has already set up the plot for Halloran's psychic abilities, so going by that, we're guessing there's going to be some liberties taken with the foundation of the Black Spot Fire in the prequel show. Having said that, in Stephen King's It, this horrendous incident surfaces in the novel's second interlude when Mike Hanlon's father, Will, recounts the story of how he and his comrades in the Air Force created the Black Spot as a safe space for black patrons. As Mike recounts the story of the Black Spot, which Will Hanlon tells him from his deathbed, we learn that the Black Spot was an improvised nightclub for the soldiers of Company E, which was the black unit at the Derry Army Air Corps base, where Will Hanlon is stationed in 1930. Will apparently joined the Army as a teenager from his home in Burgaw, North Carolina, to help support his grandmother and younger brother. But in Derry, Will endured constant racist bullying from a Sergeant Wilson who made him dig and fill the same hole for a whole day because of some perceived disrespect that would have gone unnoticed were he a white man. After some of the town's leaders complained to the Army about Company E's presence, the Army issues the black soldiers with a shack for socializing because the townspeople didn't want them mixing with white women in the local bars. Soon, Will and his friends assemble a jazz band for the place, and Dick Halloran serves burgers, fries, and soda to the patrons. Eventually, the shack's nightclub, the Black Spot, becomes as popular as Derry's other bars, even attracting large numbers of white patrons who would often bring in their own alcohol. But as a result, the other bars in town start losing money to the Black Spot. While lost profit is never welcome, these bar owners were particularly salty as they were losing money to an enterprise run by black men. As a result, on one Saturday night during November 1930, all the members of the Maine Legion of White Decency arrived with their faces covered by hoods and set the place on fire. The shack went up in flames quickly and dozens of people were killed. Apparently, Will's friend, Trev Dawson, took Sergeant Wilson's truck and knocked down one of the shack's walls, saving some lives. They had suspected that the fire was set by the same town leaders who led the Army to give Company E the Black Spot. Apparently, members of the Maine Legion of White Decency set fire to the Black Spot even though they knew that it was filled with approximately 200 to 300 people. The building also lacked proper exits, and so the fire spread rapidly, trapping many inside. At least 60 people died in this incident, including soldiers from Company E and several other white patrons who chose to fraternize with the black people. This act of arson was a blatant expression of racial hatred and violence. One of the survivors was actually Dick Halloran, who used his psychic ability known as the Shining to sense the peril and managed to rescue several lives including Will Hanlon. Unfortunately, in typical Derry fashion, the fire was officially ruled as an accident and the perpetrators were never brought to justice. The incident was largely suppressed in Derry's collective memory, reflecting the town's tendency to ignore or forget its darkest moments. However, the Black Spot Fire became a symbol of racial injustice and a catalyst for the town's recurring cycles of violence and tragedy. If you ask us, we think the most chilling account of this lore was how Will told Mike about a giant bird that he had seen in the middle of the chaos as it snatched up one of the hooded men in its talons and floated away with the help of a bunch of balloons tied to each of its wings. But honestly, it's hard to understand the true horror of this incident until you read the way King described the gradual burning of all these people trapped inside the club as their flesh melts off their skin. But given Muschietti's timeline, it's possible that Mike's grandfather would be the one going through the horrors of the Black Spot Fire, as Leroy is already working with Halloran, and Will, Mike's father, is still very young at the moment. Moreover, they can't exactly kill off Will before Mike is born, so we're pretty sure Andy has to fit the Black Spot Fire into his timeline, keeping that factor in mind. And that's our 2 cents on what we can expect from It, Welcome to Derry in terms of mass murders propagated by Pennywise's cycle of violence. Do you guys think there are more clown-fueled horrors that Andy could fit into the prequel show? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, have a marvelous day.